Okay, so we finally got our setup here, and I'm hoping that you can see what I'll be doing this evening. So this was the one that I put up on Facebook that we're going to try tonight together. You can use any kind of watercolor that you have. The watercolor paper that I'm using is the Canson XL watercoloring. It's 140 pound. And you'll soon find that not all 140 pound paper is the same. But I find that this is a really good paper for beginners. I use it a lot at school as well. And even just for myself in my studio, I use this one most of the time. You'll also need to have some watercolor paints. So this evening I'm using some Koi watercolor paints. You don't need anything this fancy either. You can use whatever watercolors you have at home, as long as you've got the primary colors and some white and black. You'll have everything that you need. I'm also going to be doing this just a small square, just so that I don't have a 3-hour video for you, but a shorter one. And we're going to use the technique to get started on. If you want to know the dimensions that I was using, I can put those in the link below. And I can also give you the link to get the watercolor paper that I'm using. So the first technique that we're going to use is a wet on wet technique. So that means that your paper is going to be wet and the watercolor that you're going to use is going to be wet. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to wet the entire section here of the paper. You'll see that I've got the framing. I'm just using some basic painter's tape, nothing special. You can use masking tape, although sometimes that can leak underneath. And then with watercolors, you want to start with the lightest color first. So in the picture, you remember we had this kind of yellowy orange that goes into the pinky and up into the purple. So we're going to start at the bottom here, and we'll start with, you can start with a yellow, or if you have an orange, you can start with the orange. It's up to you. And then you're just going to basically just start to paint this on. And the paint is going to be moving because we've got our paper is wet. And we kind of want to have that movement in our colors. And that's kind of part of the reason why I like to work wet on wet as much as I do. So then the next color you're going to use, and this is gonna, the other thing with watercolors is that you're just gonna have layers and layers of color. So don't be too concerned if this first color is pretty light, because we're gonna go over top of it after it's dried. So what you want to do with your next color is, if you've got a pinky red, that's what I would use, but you could also just use a red. And we want those to bleed into each other, right? Because that's where you're going to get that kind of mixture where it's going to start to turn, orange for you. So you can use that pink color, or if you've got more of a primary red, we can use primary red in here too. Your nighttime sky sunset here can be any colors you'd like. It doesn't have to be this way. And then I moved into some bluish purple. And if you don't have the purple that you like, of course you can mix red and blue. So if you're just working with primary colors, this is a good chance for you to do some color mixing. If you wanted that orange, you would use yellow and red. Okay, so we're just, and it doesn't have to be even with the colors. We're just going to get that first layer down. So in between, you're going to be cleaning your paintbrush off just with some water, and then you'll notice that I have a piece of paper towel here that I'm always kind of just dropping on to take a little bit of that water out. And now that you've got those colors, you can go back in and make them a little bit darker, or get them to mix a little bit more. But before we can do another layer, what we need to do is we need that layer to dry. So I usually have a hair dryer right beside me, or like a heat gun or something that can dry the layers faster. This is also why a lot of watercolor artists will have two paintings going at the same time, because while this one's drying, they'll go and work on the other one. But for today's video, I'm just going to dry. So you can tell when it's dry because it goes from having that wet glossy look to just a real matte finish. And if you've noticed that your paper is starting to warp because of the water, one of my all-time favorite tricks is to turn this paper over and to just draw an X over top in water. And the reason I do this is because as that dries, it's going to pull that paper together again and flatten your piece out. So that's one of my favorite tips to do if your paper is getting to the warp. So this time I'm going to add more of an orange to my yellow. And we're going to go back down in here and start again. Now you'll notice I didn't actually wet the paper this time. So this is a wet on dry technique. Although every once in a while you can just dip your brush just in water and start to bring that color up. And the reason I want that is because I want this color, the reddish purpley color, to start to bleed. Okay. And by bleeding, you'll see that it's actually moving down the paper in here. And that's the other reason I don't actually tape my paper down, because I like to have the ability to move it around and move that paint around when I'm painting. So we're going to get some more of that on. And I'm going to paint it up into the purple because, again, when I add that purple, I want it to start to bleed down into the pink. Now you can start to think about if you've had any clouds in here or how this direction's going to go. It's not going to be straight, even lines, right? We're just adding purple. Now, as we get higher into the night sky, it needs to get darker. So once you have this color on, you're going to start to get much darker. So this is the purple that I have. It's not a great purple. You might actually be better off making a purple using the blue and a red. But if you're ever looking to darken a color in watercolors, this is where your color theory comes into play, because you can add just a little bit of yellow, because it's opposite the purple on the color wheel, and that will darken your purple up. So instead of going straight to the black to darken, which kind of flattens your colors out, I like to go and add the opposite color on the color wheel, and that will darken the color up in a more natural way. So we're just adding more of this darker purple really close to the top. We will be adding a little bit of black, but we don't want to do that right away. Right. So trying to get as dark as we can. So the more water you use with your watercolors, the lighter the color will be. But if you start to use more pigment, then it becomes darker, right? So that's how you do a gradation with your watercolors. So less water means that your pigment's going to go on much darker for you. Oh, my paint needs a little bit more yellow. Okay. Sorry, it's taking a little bit of time here. I'm mixing my colors to get the one that I want, because it's getting to be dark out, so I really want to get to lighter up here. Go darker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry this layer off, and then we're going to go in for our last layer, which is going to have a lot more of a stronger color. So this is where you can start to really make rich colors come out. So you're going to be using just a little less water in your watercolors now, because we want to make these colors really start to show up nice and bright. And again, this is on dry, so wet on dry. And I do know that I'm going to have some landscape going on down here, so I'm not too worried, but you'll see as we layer over top, we're creating this really nice orange color as it's coming over top of that reddish purple color. We just really love how that will bleed in there and create another color. Right, and you can see as we layer this over top of that purple, you're just getting some really rich colors in the orange. So just using some water to drag that red up as I go back in to find the purple. I'm going to make that purple quite dark into that water so that it bleeds down into my reds. And then I'm going to add at this top here, where we're going to start to get really dark, a nice dark blue color. I'm going to add that into the purple I was getting nice and dark. I just feel like I want to add some blue in here, just to have another color going in. And as I said, we were going to add some black, so this is where we can start to add some black into that very top, where it would be really dark in the night sky. So the corners, maybe moving down a little bit into here. Probably didn't want that one there. So what you can do is, if you've dropped color someplace you don't want, just take all the water out of your brush, and then it will pick up the water, that color that was just dropped down there. So I'm kind of liking that for the sky. So again, before I can do the stars or the landscape, I just need to dry that again. Now comes the fun part. So you might have to make sure that you've got some clean water for this next part. And I'm just going to use some tissue here and just clean off my palette a little bit. That's the nice thing about watercolors, is they clean up so easily. Because now this is the fun part, right, that everybody used to do when they were in school. Where you mix white, and you're going to use a lot of pigment because we're going to be splashing that. So you're going to have to pull a lot of pigment out of your white with just a little bit of water. Because if we get this white too watery, then what happens is the white doesn't really show up as stars, it just kind of shows up as blobs of water. So mix that in. I'll take another paintbrush and I'll just start to tap that on there so we can get some stars in our sky, just like that. So you can put on as many stars as you'd like. I think if there's kids out there doing this, they could put more stars on. You could put them in a direction so that they're just like the galaxy. So the last thing we're going to do for this is we're going to put the landscape at the bottom. So the landscape is basically just silhouetted, so it's just black. And again, same thing that we did with the white, is that we want to use lots of pigments so that we can get a nice strong black. Instead of, because if you've got a lot of water, then of course that's going to make it more a gray than it is a black. So lots of pigment to our water, and you can decide how you want the fields to go, or you could put some mountains in. It's totally up to you. I think in the original one I had a bit of a hill, so you can put the hill up there. And you can do a couple of layers, right, if you want to get it really nice and black. If you've got some light in the back and then really dark in the front, you can almost look like you've got different mountain sections going in. So when that dries, you might want to do another layer, depending on how that's doing. And then I've got, this is a size 7 paintbrush, watercolor brush. I tend to use always the same size, like 7, 8, 6. For this one, because it's so tiny, you could get a smaller paintbrush to do the trees. The trees are going to be very similar, where you're getting a lot of black. A lot of black so that they're nice and dark. And then you're just going to be using the tip of your paintbrush for a line. And if there's trees that are further away, then they're going to be smaller, right? And then we're just going to kind of squiggle our trees out. So our trees are smaller at the top than they are at the bottom. They might not all be filled in perfectly, which is nice because not all trees are going to be exactly the same. So just have fun with it. And I think on the original one I had some up here too. If you want some trees like that are in the foreground that they're closer together, then those ones should be bigger. And if this makes you nervous, you could always take a black felt marker, like a Sharpie, or like a black gel pen when your painting's dry. That would also work to go back in and put in some trees a little bit easier than maybe with the paintbrush. My favorite pen to use is the OptiFlow from Staples. It's really easy to find, it's not expensive, and for me personally it works the best. You'll see in other videos when I use it to add to my watercolor painting, so I use that quite a bit. So once you have the tape pulled off carefully, you have your finished product. And what you should always do is make sure that you sign your work, and then you're all finished. So I want to thank you for joining me on my very first video, and I think that I can improve and probably get better as we do more and more of these. So stay tuned, and we will have another video ready for you shortly. Thank you.